This first video is going to look at angles, and we have our X and Y axis, and I want to review quickly. Remember, we have up in the right hand corner is our first quadrant, and as we go counterclockwise, we would have our second quadrant, our third quadrant, and our fourth quadrant. And when we're talking about angles, of course, we can take and we can draw any type of an angle. So I could certainly just draw an angle here, and we're looking at what is the measurement from one to the other. Well, most of the time we're going to draw our angle in reference to our X and Y axis. And we're going to start typically on the X axis, okay? And if we start on the X axis, then this is going to be called our standard position. Okay, so if you hear that term, if you're reading in your textbook when it says standard position, that simply means that you're starting, which this here would be the initial side, is going to be on the x-axis. And then, of course, your angle is going to rotate around to a terminal side, and of course, then this would be your angle. So, for example, this angle here might be about, we'll say, 60 degrees. So once again, if your angle is in what we call here this standard position, the initial side then is going to be on the x-axis, and then you're going to rotate around to your terminal side. So then, of course, this is an angle that's represented with a positive 60 degrees. We certainly could have another angle here. If, once again, we start here as our starting position on the x-axis, what would happen if we were to move downward? If this is the x-axis and we rotate down this way, then to our terminal side, then here this would be a negative angle because we're going in a clockwise position. So when we go this way, your angle is going to be negative. And if your angle is rotating in a counterclockwise direction, the angle is going to be positive. Okay, so that's how we determine whether your angle for is going to be positive or negative. So now what do we mean here, just to review a little bit? If we're talking about angles, then essentially then we're taking a circle, and we know that if we have a circle, we say that that's divided up, or it makes 360 degrees. And when you say you've gone 360 degrees, if we start over here at 0 degrees and go all the way around, we're going to end up right where we started from. So we're essentially taking a circle and we're dividing this circle into 360 equal parts. And that's where we come up with 360 degrees. So therefore, if we were to go halfway around the circle, then we're going to take half of 360. So that means halfway around would be 180 degrees. And if we went up here to the top of the circle, we rotate half of that, then of course half of 180, we would have 90 degrees. And then if we went halfway in between here, we would end up with 45 degrees. So let's go ahead and mark this off. If we had 0 degrees and we go to 45, another 45 would be 90. And then if we went from 90 to another 45, that would be 135 degrees. And another 45 would be 180. And then if we go another 45 degrees, that's going to give us 225 degrees. And then, of course, then we're now at the bottom of our circle here, and that's going to be 270 degrees. And if we go another 45 degrees, we're at 315 degrees. And if we add 45, we're around to 360. So these are going to be some of our important angles that we're going to look at. Then we can also, divide this into equal amounts of 30 degrees. So if this was, we'll say 30 degrees here, and if we have another 30, we would end up with 60 degrees. And then if we add another, we get 90. And then another 30 would be 120. And then we would get 150. and 180. And 180 plus 30 would give us 210 degrees. And then 210 plus 30 is going to equal 240 degrees. And then we get with 270, and 270 plus 30 would be 300 degrees. And then another 30 would give us 330 degrees. And then we're back around to 360. And once again, realize that here, when we rotate this direction, we're going to be positive, whereas if we're rotating downward, the angle is going to be negative. Now, the angles I listed here, we're going to talk more about these. I mean, of course, you could have any angle in here. We could have an angle of 31 degrees or 38 degrees. But these are some of the special angles that we're going to refer to a little more frequently here. 0, 30, 45, 60, 90, and so on. So for example, if all of these angles I've listed here, typically we'll look at going in the positive direction in a counterclockwise. Now, if we are looking at a negative angle, then that means if we were to rotate down here all the way to this position at the bottom of the circle, we could also call this 270 a negative 90 degrees. Then just like the same location here of 315, then that's the same location as 45 kind of going up, so this would still be a negative 45 degrees. And then of course we continue to rotate around, we would have a negative 180 degrees. So just realize when we're going in a clockwise rotation, you're going to end up with a negative angle. Okay, next we want to look at what's called coterminal angles. And when we have coterminal angles, we're looking at two angles in standard position. And this is where it's important to remember, what is standard position? Well, we just talked about standard position, and that's where we said that if you have your angle, the initial side is going to be here on the x-axis, okay? So the definition for coterminal is two angles are in standard position. So that simply means that the angles are both going to start on this positive x-axis. Now, the other part of the definition is there are two angles in standard position that have the same terminal side. And we talked about the terminal side, that is where the angle ends. So if we start here and we look at an example of this, we have our x and y axis, and if I am to start an angle here at the initial side, let's say that we start off with, I'm going to use this Greek letter here, theta, okay, and you're going to find out when we have variables for angles, a lot of times instead of using x, y, and z like you would in algebra, when we refer to angles a lot of times, so we know we're talking about an angle, we will use a Greek letter, and one that's most commonly used here is theta, which is, let's say, we'll call it 100 degrees. So 100 degrees, we know this is 90 degrees, so theta then is going to start here and rotate around to this position. This then would be roughly 100 degrees. So then if we want to draw a coterminal angle, then we could look at that and say, well, what if we use this Greek letter alpha here? And we could say that maybe that's going to be a negative 260. Well, how do we get that? Well, if we start here on the positive x-axis and we go in a negative direction, we would end up over here at a negative 260. So this angle is going to start on the positive x-axis, even though it's negative, and it's going to end up here at the exact same terminal side. So whether we go in a positive 100 degrees or a negative 260 degrees, we're going to end up at the same position. All right, do you think we're going to have another coterminal angle? Or is that only going to be it? Positive 100 and a negative 260. Well, if you think about this carefully, we will actually have another angle, and there's actually be infinite angles, and I'll use the Greek letter here, beta, and I'm going to use this to be 460 degrees. And what that means is if I start here, and if I go all the way around, that's 360 degrees. But I want to continue to go another 100 degrees so that I'm here at this position. So therefore the angle beta is 460 degrees. So basically here we have these coterminal angles here that where we start at the same position on the positive x-axis here, but they all end at the same terminal side here. And that's what we mean here when we define the angles to be coterminal. They have the same standard position and they have the same terminal side. Okay, so let's look at another example here. If I was to give you, let's say we have an angle of 20 degrees, and we know 20 degrees would be somewhere in this position here. And I want you to give me a coterminal angle. Well, you could certainly say, well, then I could go all the way around this way, and that would be 360 degrees to this point, and then I could do what? Add the other 20, so 360 plus 20, we would end up with 380 degrees. Or if we want an angle that is going to be negative, that means if we start here, we would go all the way around this way. Well, we know that all the way around here is 360, so that means this must be what? A negative 340, so we'd have a negative 340 degrees. Because if we went all the way around negative, that would be a negative 360 degrees, and we're going to go 20 degrees short of that, so here we would have another coterminal angle. So it's really easy to find. You're just looking at where you start from the same side and you end up at the same location. All right, when we're talking about angles, we also hear the term acute. And what do we mean if we have an acute angle? That means that the angle is going to be somewhere in between, and I'm sure you probably know the answer here. It's going to be between 0 degrees and 90 degrees. And if we have an obtuse angle, that means the angle is going to be somewhere between 90 degrees and 180 degrees. Okay, so make sure you're familiar with the terms acute angles and an obtuse angle. All right, next, the last topic we're going to have for this video, we're going to look at what do we mean when we have complementary angles and if we have supplementary angles. And these are two terms you might get confused if you're not careful. If we're talking about a complementary angle, then this is very simple. Complementary angles are two angles that add up to 90 degrees. So for example, here, if we have this angle is, we'll say this is 20 degrees. And if I want to know the complement of the 20-degree angle, then all I'm going to have to do is take, we know that if complementary two angles add up to 90 degrees, then the complement would be this piece here. So that's just going to be simply 90 degrees minus 20 degrees, which we would know would simply be 70 degrees. So anytime you're trying to find a complementary, you're going to take 90 degrees minus your angle. So 90 degrees minus whatever your angle that you're given. That will give you your complementary angle. Now, What about supplementary? Well, supplementary are two angles that are going to add up to 180 degrees. So if we start out here and let's say that we have an angle of 70 degrees, and if we want to find the complement, then that's going to be the angle that's going to go all the way over here to 180, and that would hopefully be obvious. You could see that that's going to be 110 degrees. Or once again, you would take 180 minus the given angle 70 degrees, and we would end up with 110. Now, of course, we could look at this and we could say, well, we found here the supplement is 110. The complement of 70 degrees would be, once again, in this case, 20, because that would add up to 90 degrees. All right, so let me give you an example here and see if you can figure this one out. Or I'll give you two examples. The first one is, what if I give you the angle of, let's say, draw this a little bit better. If we have an angle here of 80 degrees, and I want you to find the complement. Okay, then of course the complement would go from here to here. So we know that if it's 80 plus 10 more would give us 90. So the complement would be 10 degrees. Then what is going to be the supplement? Well, that means it's going to have to add up to 180 degrees. So therefore we already have 80, so we would need another 100 degrees. All right, see if we can figure this one out. If I give you the following, let's say that we have the given angle is over here, and let's say this is 120 degrees, and I want to know the complement. And probably if you think for a little bit about this, you're thinking, well, the angle's already greater than 90 degrees. So there is no complement. We can't add an angle to 120 to get 90, so therefore there is no complement. So here we would only have a supplementary angle, which is what's left here, to end up with 180. So 180 minus 120, we would have a supplement of 60 degrees, but there is no complement. So be very careful. They will ask you questions like this, and if your angle is greater than 90 degrees, you will not have a complement for that angle. Okay, so if we quickly review here, standard position, your initial side is on the positive x-axis, and then when you rotate counterclockwise upwards, your angle is positive. When you rotate down in a clockwise rotation, your angle is going to be negative.